The Nintendo Switch was, to me, the exact same as the Nintendo DS and the Nintendo Game Boy, by which I mean its only real purpose for existing and me having one was so that I could play the new Pokemon games as they released. The very first Pokemon game on the Switch was Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which were just remakes of the very first Pokemon region, which I've played about 50 times, so I skipped them. The first Pokemon games which featured a new region were Pokemon Sword and Shield. I went with Sword, and I did not like it. At all. And I tried, I really tried to like it, but for the first time ever when playing a Pokemon game, I felt exactly one emotion during my time with Sword. Sheer boredom. And if I'm being completely honest, with the exceptions of Legends Arceus and Mystery Dungeon Team DX, every Pokemon game on the Switch has filled me with that emotion. Pure boredom, and also frustration at them just getting worse and worse. So I remember it very clearly. It was the day after I had finished playing Pokemon Sword, and I realized that I did not want to play it anymore. I didn't want to play the post-game, or do a rerun, or level up my Pokemon, or do a Nuzlocke, or do anything with it whatsoever. Nothing that I would have done with any other game in the series. I was looking at what was essentially a useless console to me, and I remembered thinking that there had been one other game that had caught my interest over the weeks before I got my hands on a Switch that was exclusive to the console, and that was Fire Emblem Three Houses. Now, I had never actually played a Fire Emblem game before. I'd heard of the series just through cultural osmosis that it was a grid-based strategy game which had a reputation of being difficult, but aside from that, I knew next to nothing about it. Still, I had always been interested in playing a Fire Emblem game. I didn't like the idea of my Switch just collecting dust, and I had nothing better to do. So I went and got myself a copy, some takeout, sat down and played Three Houses. And it was really good. Three Houses is a phenomenal game. It's fun, it's charming, its mechanics are easy to understand yet extremely difficult to master, and it won't hold your hand. It can and will kick your teeth in and laugh at you if you're not paying attention and playing it on the harder difficulties. So it forces players to engage with its core mechanics, both evident and obscure, to eke out every possible advantage that they can get. And you're going to have to do this if you want to make progress and not slam your head against the wall for the next 6 hours. After that, I was hooked. Consider me a fan of Fire Emblem. When's the next entry? That was Fire Emblem Engage, which released just a few months ago in January of 2024, where it... Wait, hold on, what do you mean it came out in January of 2023? Yeah, Engage was released to effectively zero fanfare whatsoever outside of the Fire Emblem community, to the point where I didn't even know it existed until a full year later. I was looking forward to the next installment and just assumed that it was still in development. So imagine my surprise when I found that it had already been released a year ago, and having now played it, I can bloody well see why I didn't leave the Fire Emblem community all that much. It's not that it's bad, necessarily. There's a lot of good parts to it. It is enjoyable. I had fun while playing it. But it is such a departure from Three Houses that I found it extremely difficult to adjust. But I stuck with it, got there, and by the time I was finished, I felt like I had come to realize in hindsight what exactly it was that made Three Houses such a brilliant game in the first place, in a sort of you don't know what you had until it's gone revelation, so to speak. What made Three Houses so good wasn't any one thing. It was in fact a bunch of small things, from mechanics to how the player is treated, to the world, to the themes and the setting, things that you don't even really understand while they're there. Some of them you might even find borderline infuriating, but they contributed to a game that is vastly greater than the sum of its parts. Once removed, I feel like I understood exactly what it was about Three Houses that I loved. I actually found it fascinating to an extent, realizing how all these pieces came together to create a game I hold in such high regard. I need to underline this right now. At the time in which I'm speaking and you are hearing these words with presumably your ears in early days of 2024, I have not played any other Fire Emblem game other than these two. Well, no, I do tell a lie. I did play a bit of Three Hopes, but well, let me take you on a journey of my experience with that real quick. Here's the cover for Three Houses. Now here's the cover for Engage. Now here's the cover for Three Hopes. Notice anything? Here's the gameplay for Three Houses. Here's the gameplay for Engage. And here's the gameplay for Three Hopes. There's a few differences, aren't there? And then you look at the covers again and you realize what's standing out. Three Hopes is Fire Emblem Warriors. It's a Dynasty Warriors game, and I have no frame of reference whatsoever for Dynasty Warriors, so I don't know if it even counts. Engage doesn't seem to think so, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But the point is, that aside, I have absolutely no experience with this series outside of these two entries. I don't know most of the characters, the history, or basically anything outside of what I know from these two games. But Engage is a game that struggles. It's not a bad game, but it is one that struggles. I barely even know anything about this series pre-Switch, and even I can tell something's not quite right here. And I'm an idiot who had to remake this analysis about 13 times in the last week, so God knows how this must seem to people who actually have two brain cells that can rub together. And figuring out why that is, and why it struggles to live up to a game like Three Houses, I think it could teach us a lot about this series, what works, what doesn't, and why they either don't work or do work. And this does mean that some of the critiques that I have of these two games, and of N-Gage in particular, may well be staples of the Fire Emblem series as a whole. I might come out and say, boy, that peacock slapping mechanic really gets on my nerves, and then someone who is more familiar with the series might punch a hole in the monitor and yell, "You uncultured swine! The peacock slapping mechanic is the cornerstone to Fire Emblem's very identity!" And that's just a risk you're going to have to take, I'm afraid.
Come again?
It could be the Three Houses is just exceptionally good, or N-Gage is exceptionally bad, or average, or maybe they're both mid in the wider context of the series. I have absolutely no idea. It is possible that after playing other entries in the series, I may have a radically different perspective on the games and what makes them tick, but I feel like an outsider's perspective could be valuable insight. And another and the main reason that I'm doing this is simple. Because no one can stop me. So that's what this is going to be, a critical analysis of Three Houses and N-Gage and comparing and contrasting them. And for non-Fire Emblem fans, I want to make this as accessible as I can to anyone who hasn't played any game in the series, or to someone who just likes learning about different things from people who are invested in them even though they themselves have no interest in engaging with the media themselves. I see you, because I'm one of you, so fret not. We've got a lot to get through, so let's get started. So I think that the first thing to do is to go over the prologues of each game, how the player character is introduced, the first look at these worlds, and the introduction of some central mechanics. How these are all introduced, I feel, can be a good indicator for how a game is going to be overall. I've developed a pretty good sense for when a game, book, or series is going to be solid based on its introductions, and I've done this based on how precisely the mechanics and story are presented. A piece of media that is of quality will usually care enough to provide an engaging opening and introduce its story, themes, and mechanics in an interesting way. Now, this criteria hasn't always worked in the past. Some series have had good introductions that got screwed up later down the line, while others had relatively tame introductions and ended up being absolutely amazing, and sometimes there's no relation whatsoever. Like I said, this method isn't perfect, but I feel like with the Fire Emblem games I hit the nail right on the head. Now, for the purposes of this analysis, we're going to be going with the default names for each game. So that's Byleth in Three Houses, and it is occurring to me at this moment that I have never heard the name of N-Gage's avatar said out loud, and I haven't the faintest idea what it would be. Alia? Aliala? Hold on a moment. Okay, so at the point of this being made, no one else seems to know it either, but I did find one pronunciation I like. Alar. So we're going with that. Byleth and Alar. In each game, you can choose if you want to play as a male or female avatar, but even choosing this in both games is handled differently. We're going to go over Three Houses prologue first, and then go into N-Gage's, and see what differences crop up in how it's handled. In the Three Houses prologue, the first thing that we see is an immense battle taking place. There are clashing armies, Pegasus and wyverns and firebombs and magic and just all manner of fantasy war tomfoolery. Some lady called Zeros battles and then stabs some bloke called Nemesis, then claims his super fancy extendo sword. You know, it occurs to me I could have phrased that better. I'm not going to. Anyway, then I guess black hole of memories starts flashing before us, and then we're face to face with some sort of ethereal child sat atop a throne in a realm of complete darkness. They then speak to us as the player. During this, we don't leave a first person perspective, and it's here that we get to choose Byleth's appearance and name. Only after we have done so do we get a third person perspective of our avatar. After this, Byleth is woken up by Geralt, this bloke, their father. It turns out this was a dream, and a recurring one at that. We're given a dialogue option, with which we can choose to tell Geralt about either the battlefield or about the girl. And I want to pause this section for just a moment because we're already learning 4 things in rapid succession. First, Geralt's dialogue is what is informing us that this is a reoccurring thing for Byleth. Second, that this is a dream. Third and fourth are what the dialogue options are telling us. They're here to confirm to the player that the opening cinematic and the interactions with the ethereal child, where we chose our avatar's appearance and name, both did in fact occur in Byleth's dream, and that they have active memories of what happened to them. In this situation, we're simply choosing which one of these things is more important to us. This is reinforced when you select either one, where Geralt confirms that this isn't the first time that Byleth has brought it up. This is a very densely packed introduction sequence, especially considering that we're only on the first scene and the first dialogue option outside of the dream. On your first playthrough, it's likely that you didn't even realise that that's what's going on, but your brain did, without you even knowing it. All the information is just in your head now for when you need to refer back to it, and as we get further into the story, this information may or may not become relevant. This is a very good sign of things to come. Byleth and Geralt are mercenaries, not affiliated with any of the nations on this continent known as Fodlan. We're able to converse with him a little, being given a few more dialogue options, mostly binary ones, but I'm going to have more to say in this little feature before we're done. I'll be saving a number of these talking points for when we get to the hub area, where we can talk about the mechanics as one giant block. Though they have a job waiting for them in a nearby kingdom, a commotion outside calls their attention. 3 people, Dimitri, Claude and Edelgard, request our aid. They're being hunted down by bandits. We assist them, and this serves as our main tutorial mission. By the end of the fight, the bandit leader attempts to kill Edelgard, but Byleth gets in the way, prepared to take the blow which will most likely get them killed. At which point, time literally stops. They find themselves back in the darkness realm with the ethereal child, now referring to themselves as Sophis. Turns out, she's not a dream. She's very much real, and is responsible for time coming to a halt. Should Byleth croak, so would Sophis, so she decides to simply turn back the hands of time, which is a thing that she can do. And then she rewinds time. And this time, Byleth is able to disarm the bandit leader and save Edelgard without getting themselves cleaved in twain. In both Three Houses and Engage, you have the option of pressing a button and then rewinding back to a previous number of actions in order to try another approach should your previous one fail, or in the event that you're playing on classic mode, save your characters from straight up permadeath. You only get a limited number of these charges per match though if you're playing on the harder difficulties. In Three Houses, this mechanic is called the Divine Pulse. After the fight, the group is approached by another group called the Knights of Seros, seeking to rescue Claude, Dimitri and Edelgard. They're led by this guy called Alois. He and Geralt knew one another in the past, Geralt turning out having been a Knight of Seros himself before becoming a mercenary. Alois even refers to Geralt as a captain, showing that he was a high-ranking member of the Order. Alois insists that Geralt and Byleth come back with him to the Garreg Mach Monastery, something which Geralt reluctantly agrees to. Before setting off, Byleth speaks briefly with Claude, Dimitri and Edelgard, where we learn that all 3 of them are students at the Officers' Academy, which is also at the same monastery. Each of them also requests that you pledge your services to their respective homelands, of which we learn they are the respective heirs to the thrones of. Edelgard is to be the next Emperor of the Adrestian Empire, Dimitri is the next King of the Holy Kingdom of Fargus, and Claude is the next Sovereign Duke of the Leicester Alliance. We're given another dialogue option where we can state which one of these we would rather pledge ourselves to. This choice isn't binding at all, but depending on which one we pick, we can get a little support card with the corresponding heir. We could have gotten one earlier with Geralt, but you can optionally miss that one. This choice is here to ensure that the player understands that certain dialogue options can increase support points with certain characters at the expense of others. This is another thing that I want to talk about, and will, but to sum them up briefly. Supports are a central aspect of character development which are reflected in small optional cutscenes. They can have an impact on gameplay, such as increasing the chance to hit a target or how much damage you do when 2 units with support ranks are adjacent to one another. Finally, they can also impact relationship options down the line. With that, the group leaves and goes to Garreg Mach. Once there, we're introduced to the Archbishop Rhea, who is the representative of the Church of Seros, which is the dominant religious faith of Fodlan. Rhea wants Geralt back into the Knights of Seros. Alone, he refers to this as being forced back into service, but in front of Rhea, he doesn't argue or protest, hinting that he has reservations about her. He even warns Byleth to be wary of Rhea. Though speaking of Byleth, their services are also required. As a teacher, Rhea wants Byleth to serve as a professor of the monastery. We get to go around Garreg Mach introducing ourselves to people, getting a feel for the characters around the place before we make the choice of which house we would like to be responsible for teaching. The academy is split into 3 houses, to which students are assigned based on their affiliated nation. The Black Eagles, led by Edelgard, the Blue Lions, led by Dimitri, and the Golden Deer, led by Claude. I'll be perfectly honest with you, Dimitri was a no-go for me right from the start. First of all, he's from a holy kingdom, which... And second, he doesn't make a particularly good first impression. Not that I dislike him or anything, I just like him the least out of the 3 house leaders. Edelgard has what can only be described as an aura about her, and so far all scenes seem to be putting a subtle focus on her. And Claude has made me laugh like 3 times already, while Dimitri is just... There. And being pretty to someone, I assume, but that someone sure wasn't me. So really, it was a choice between the Black Eagles and the Golden Deer. You want to know how I resolved that dilemma? I flipped the coin. Okay, heads I go with Edelgard, tails I go with Claude. Okay, looks like I'm going with the Adrestian Empire. I'm sure this won't lead to any moral quandaries down the line. Now, up next would be the hub mechanics, and I want to save those for direct one-to-one comparisons with N-Gage, because I have a lot to talk about in regards to the differences between them, so we'll put that on hold for the time being. Instead, we'll go back and recount N-Gage's opening, and compare and contrast that from Three Houses. After selecting your avatar for N-Gage, I have to stop this right away, don't I? It's going to be one of those analyses, isn't it? This is a nitpick, don't get me wrong, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't explain why I like this less than I like Three Houses' way of doing things. There's no context for why you're choosing your appearance in N-Gage, you just are. Contrast this with Three Houses. We find ourselves in a dream, and we're asked directly questions by Sophis. This leads into us choosing how we appear and our name. I find the Three Houses approach preferable. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with having a character selector at the start of the game, and that's not necessarily an indicator of quality. Plenty of good games have character creators before you even enter the game, but I find the idea of the character customizer being integrated into the story to be a much more interesting one, because it feels like the game is already responding to the choices that you're making. This is just a personal taste thing, I think. I don't think it's fair to critique N-Gage over it too much. A quick word on Alar's design itself though. I love this design, especially the female version, with this long flowing bi-coloured hair which flows with the wind and heterochromic eyes on opposing sides, red hair, blue hair, red eye, with streaks of both on each side contrasted with the white and blue outfit with accented gold trimmings. It's phenomenal. This design is iconic, it's great, I love it. This should be the design for a series protagonist, and look, I'm going to be particularly harsh towards N-Gage's story, but I will say this. For the kind of story that it's going for, this sort of design is perfect. I have no further notes, I love it. But regardless, once we've done that, we're given a cutscene of a battle taking place in what appears to be a corridor. A bunch of characters that are presumably allies of yours are fighting enemies all around you, and the ghost of... Don't I recognize you from somewhere? You're that bloke from Smash Brothers, aren't you? Anyway, Sword Dude 9000 and Alar storm straight past all the enemies into a room where a single enemy is standing. We will later vaguely recognize him as the big bad of this entire game. We knock him out in a couple of moves, one of which showcasing a key mechanic of this game called an N-Gage, where we basically merge with Ghost Dude. This victory is treated as though the day has been saved and the end of a war. Then Alar wakes up. This is a dream. Look, I don't want to open this up with negativity right out of the gate, but having played all of N-Gage and then looking back, this sequence is strange to me. I suppose I should rip the band-aid off right now. In Three Houses, the battlefield that Byleth is witnessing is a memory. It's not theirs, but it's a memory. You could probably guess that what you saw wasn't just a dream due to Sophis being real and a tangible aspect of the world that sticks with you and can literally alter the flow of time at will. If that part is real, then the rest of the dream probably had something to it. But even if you missed that and it wasn't a dream, but some kind of flashback that Byleth didn't know about, once you've completed Three Houses, you could look back on this opening sequence and you'd have new revelations, context, and be able to use it to fill in missing pieces of the story. In N-Gage, this is a dream. That's it. And a very confusing one of that because this doesn't happen. One of the key aspects of N-Gage is that when Alar wakes up, they have no memories of themselves or of anyone around them. But we do learn early on that they were injured during a war 1,000 years ago, and that they have been asleep ever since. When we finally learn exactly what happened, it didn't look anything like what happened in Alar's dream. The final fight also doesn't look anything like Alar's dream either, so it wasn't a premonition, which is apparently a thing in this universe. But you know what? I'm willing to overlook that as some sort of dream-based abstraction. Dreams don't often make a ton of sense, even if they're just recounting memories, so I'll give it that. What I'm not willing to grant, and what is perhaps the most baffling part of this sequence, all the allies that are helping Alar in this fight, these are people that they used to know in the past. These are the people that they're going to meet throughout the course of the story. That there is Princess Ivy from Elusia, that's Prince Diamant from Brodia, that's Princess Timera from the Queendom of Solm, and that's Prince Alfred from Virene. You recruit all of these people throughout the story, but this is happening before Alar has woken up and met any of these people. So here's my issue, right? If it's not a memory trying to surface, and it's not a premonition depicting what will happen in the future, but it clearly was a dream that Aloy did have, what exactly is going on, and how in the crap are there accurate depictions of all your future allies that you haven't met yet in this dream exactly? Alfred, I'm willing to accept. We learned that he visited Aylar's resting place while they slept. Not counting the fact that Aylar didn't open their eyes, I'm willing to be charitable and say that magic did it, or that he spoke of Aylar while they slept and their brain just conjured up a vision of what he would look like. Just like I'm willing to be charitable and say that Timera went once or twice. I don't actually recall and I don't care enough to go back and check, but for the sake of argument, we'll say that she did a couple of times. When we meet him though, Diamond directly says it's nice to meet you in person, implying directly that he's never seen Aylar. And even assuming that I'm misremembering or didn't get a dialogue option suggesting that he did see Aylar, we know for a fact Ivy never visited Aylar while they slept because the religion of her homeland would not permit it. So where did they come from? The interpretation of this intro sequence, which has the least number of contradictions to me, is that it is devoid of meaning or purpose. It's just a thing that is designed to give you a look and feel for how the game would play. So, I don't know what's going on there, but already there's a notable difference between how Three Houses and Engage have opened up their stories. Both had a character asleep and dreaming something, but in Three Houses, that was still a key aspect of the story. In Engage, it was not. Ultimately, this is a minor point overall. It doesn't really impact the story, I suppose, it's just more confusing than anything. The issue is that the same people who made this confusing sequence also made the rest of the game. But again, let's not ring the alarm bells quite yet. Your ears might have perked up on that whole visiting a sleeping person thing. That's not something that most normal people do. So this is probably the best segue I'm going to get to go into this next point. So you might find it a bit weird that people who Aylar doesn't know are visiting them while they sleep and what religion has to do with any of this. Well, as we quickly learn once Aylar is awake, you're God. A major aspect of the world of Engage is that dragons are considered sacred beings and worshipped as gods. Though more are stated to exist, there are two primary religions, the faith of the Divine Dragon and the faith of the Fell Dragon. The vast majority of people in this world worship the Divine Dragon, with the Fell Dragon primarily relegated to worship in the country of Elusia. Furthermore, Aylar is the child of the Divine Dragon Monarch, making you effectively religious royalty. I'll come back to this later, believe me, I have a lot to say on this particular point. Suffice it to say, we learned that there have been over 30 generations of people who have guarded Aylar while they slept, the Stewards of the Dragon. These are Vander, the 32nd Steward, and Clan and Fram, a pair of twins who are both considered the 33rd Steward. Do you want to know the very moment that I realised I was going to have an issue with Engage? It was this.
Hello there. And you are?
Your player character has actual lines of dialogue. Byleth does not, at least not like this. Their voice lines tend to show up in combat or when they level up, and this is the extent of their voice lines. And the player is given dialogue options in all other situations. There are even some where you're only given a single option and you can only select that. This allows for two things. First, it allows for the player to project aspects of their own personality onto Byleth. Without saying anything directly to any other character in the story, there's less of a barrier present to do so. And second, it avoids the situation where you as the player select one dialogue option and what the character actually says is something completely off the wall. Byleth is saying exactly what is being said in the dialogue option that you chose. Byleth has their own personality, but as the player you're choosing what they decide matters most to them. This also has the added bonus of me not wanting to strangle Byleth every time they've decided to do something incredibly stupid. I do not get that with Aylar. Aylar just does things, completely on their own. They have their own things going on and their own fears and the likes. Now, in a lot of games this is fun. I'm not exactly upset about, say, Ezio Auditore from Assassin's Creed having his own opinions or desires, or making me as the player do things that I find ridiculous. But jumping from the avatar being at least something of an extension of the player in Three Houses to this is certainly an adjustment. It's not quite what I expected. But again, I'm not willing to critique Engage too much for this quite yet. I just feel like if you're going to call your game a role-playing game, I should have the ability to role-play a bit, but whatever, I'm willing to concede that this might just be a me thing. Again, this is all from the perspective of someone who has only played Three Houses and Engage. I've heard that there are other games that have avatars with dialogue, but I've also heard that a lot of fans of the series would prefer that they shut their mouths, so do with that what you will, I guess. So, the stewards and Aylar leave the castle they were in and run into the Corrupted, Alar is freaked out by them, and we'll get back to these things too. We end up in a fight during which we use the ring on Alar's finger to engage with Ghost Dream Sword Boy, Marth. We fight some more and get saved by the Divine Dragon Monarch. The reunion between Alar and the Monarch, Lumera, is a somewhat awkward one on account of Alar not remembering the first thing about her. I actually like this direction to go with for such a story beat. It's not overly dramatic yet, but it's clear that there's a sadness and a feeling of loss at the same time between two people that simply used to know one another, but one of them can't recall anything anymore. On the journey to Lithos Castle, we get a narration of the world that we find ourselves in, Elios. There are 5 nations: Lithos, Firene, Brodia, Elusia, and Solm. There used to be a 6th one called Gradlon, but that is just straight up gone. It's not here anymore, apparently. Anyway, Gradlon was the home of the Fell Dragon, and apparently all the other nations teamed up to beat the snot out of it. To do this, they used the emblems, which is what Ghost Boy Marth is. A sort of impression of a hero from another world, called to this one to serve as boosts to other fighters. The way it's discussed, divine dragons are considered holy because they can summon these emblems, with the ability to speak and with free will through the power of prayer. Fell dragons can summon emblems, but in doing so suppress the freedom of will of the emblem, as well as their ability to speak, and do so using incantations. 1,000 years ago, they kicked the kidneys out of the Fell Dragon Sombron and imprisoned him someplace, but now the binding keeping him in place is weakening, hence our awakening, apparently. In the castle, there is a room full of emblem rings, 6 of them. The other 6 are scattered between the other nations as a cautionary measure to ensure that anyone who's trying to take them all can't get them in just one place. We then have a practice match during which we're introduced to another emblem, Sigurd, and win. Lumera then attempts to give a ring to Alar as a sort of late birthday gift, centuries late though it may be, and Alar rejects it because they feel it was a gift for someone that they aren't. Kind of a dick move, to be honest with you, Alar. You could have given me the option game, at least then this would be justified. They all go to sleep. Alar then has another dream where they have all red hair and they're in front of a bunch of ruins and fire and grinning at Lumera like a maniac. Why are you here alone? I feel like I'd have more pressing questions such as, why is everything on fire? I'm going to be honest, even after having beaten Engage and knowing the full twists and why the hair is all red, I have no idea what this dream is even meant to be about, or why they even had it. I guess it's implied to be tied to Alar's subconscious, but it's never expanded upon, it never happens again, and it's barely plot relevant. It's technically foreshadowing in the same way that... Okay, does anyone know about Chekhov's gun? It's a writing theory which basically states that if a gun shows up early in a scene, it should be used later in the story in order to justify its presence. Now, imagine that principle, but instead of actually seeing a gun in the scene, the character just had a dream about something vaguely gun-shaped, and that was the foreshadowing. That's basically what this dream is. We'll get into it.
I doubt he will attack anytime soon.
Yeah, about that. There's suddenly an attack on the castle, a bunch of Elusian soldiers led by someone in a cloak, attacking an effort to steal the emblem rings. During this battle, randomly, Prince Alfred and his retainers show up and become permanent party members. They push back the invading troops and confront Cloak over here. They attack Alar and Lumera takes a hit. After that, Cloak over here starts leaving and in doing so drops a crystal. After Vander picks it up and gives it to Alar, we learn that this crystal can... rewind time. So this serves the same purpose as the Divine Pulse in Three Houses, and wow, they didn't even try here, did they? In Three Houses, the Divine Pulse is a unique ability which adds to the mystery surrounding Byleth, Sophis, and everything that's going on. In Engage, it falls out of a villain's pocket and you get time warping powers. I don't know, personally, if I had something that powerful, I would have kept it on a chain, or at least in a secure pocket with a zip on. Also, doesn't this imply that there are other time crystals? Like, if these can just be found or made, shouldn't other people be able to use them and therefore have them in their possession? This seems like a pretty powerful weapon to not attempt to recover or have duplicates of. Yeah, apparently not. But we do know that one of the villains has the power to use magic to mess with time, so they don't make another time crystal because... Question mark? Yeah, I'm going to level with you. I think this Three Houses story implementation of the Divine Pulse is a lot more engaging than Engage's, ironically enough. You couldn't have had Alar steal the bloody thing at least? Now, to be totally fair, this does lead to one interesting mission where when faced with an overwhelming force and on the run, the crystal is stolen from Alar, and they and their army have to navigate a map without it as your enemy uses it to save their own units and to screw with you. Only halfway through, new party members show up, steal it, and then you can use it again, so it's like a brief snippet into a far more interesting, intense mission. The ways that these mechanics are integrated into the stories of their respective games could not be any more different. The fact that Byleth is able to use the Divine Pulse at all is a major story point which is integrated into the character, because the ability to rewind the time probably should be treated with far more gravity than it being something you can just drop out of your pocket. For Engage, it just seems to exist because the Fire Emblem series has a time rewinding mechanic and refused to put any more force into it other than that. So after that, and after the hit she took, Lumera is dying and... Look, I don't mean to come across as callous, I really don't, and obviously I wouldn't hold this stance if this was happening to real people. But this is straight up the most awkward and uncomfortable sequence in the entire game. I don't know these people, I don't have any attachment to them, and more to the point, Ayla doesn't. To them, this should just be someone that she kind of vaguely knows dying, but it's treated as the single most tragic event that could possibly happen, and it goes on for so goddamn long. It does not stop. They dedicate solid minutes to this. It's still ongoing. We're not even halfway through it yet. I don't know, you people. I feel like I should be sad, but I straight up am not. I'm sorry. I have no investments in this situation, and I don't understand why Ayla does. Do I sound like a psychopath? Probably, but it's worth mentioning that well, spoilers, I guess, but come on, you knew that this was coming the moment I said that Geralt was Byleth's father. Geralt is dying, and Byleth doesn't say a word. It goes on for like a tenth the length of this, but I felt far worse for Byleth in this situation because I had an attachment to Geralt and I understood his relationship with Byleth. They spent years together working as mercenaries. It makes sense for Byleth to be devastated because they have these sorts of memories of him that they cherish. And more to the point, Byleth crying meant something. Despite primarily being an avatar for the player, Byleth did have their own distinct personality traits, one of which was a near total suppression of their emotions. This helped the player to project their own emotions onto Byleth, but it also meant that when Byleth showed emotion, it was noteworthy. Byleth crying was impactful, and it conveyed everything that it needed to without a single word, and without the need for such a prolonged and awkward scene like Engage has had. There's nothing wrong with having a more emotional main lead, but you have to give the audience a reason to care, both about the main characters and the person that they're mourning. This is the risk you take when you try to combine a story about amnesia and the death of a loved one. Unless you're going to take the time to develop the relationship, it risks falling completely flat, and it's still going, for the love of... It's finished? Oh, thank the Allfather, I've never felt more awkward in my entire life. After that, Alfred tells us that the corrupted are in Firene and he is seeking aid. Ayla accepts on behalf of Lumera and they set up a base of operations in the Somniel, the place Ayla had been kept when they were in their 1,000-year-long coma. This will serve as Engage's hub, and finally, we're at the part of the analysis I wanted to get to from the very beginning. Right, we're going to start with the gameplay of both of these games since they're fairly similar with only minute differences between the two, and then we can talk about the hub worlds to keep this orderly. Now, if the only thing that you're interested in is how the combat and strategy of these games works, then I have some relatively good news. I don't have any major issues with either of these games. In fact, if we're talking about the battle system alone, I think I might slightly prefer Engage's, thanks to the emblem mechanic, but one thing at a time. Battles in Fire Emblem are grid-based, you have so many units and so does the opposing side. First side to meet their victory conditions wins. That might be taking a position or just wiping out all the enemy units or something else. You can select units, and while you're in the hub world of the respective games you can change the class of those units, but the bottom line here is that there are a few archetypes which combat one another. For example, archers are effective against flying enemies, magic users are effective against armored enemies, swords are effective against axes, that kind of thing. Various classes can add resistances to those weaknesses or boost their strengths or make a unit fill in another niche if you so want. Engage takes this a step further by adding in the emblem mechanic. Certain emblems can impart different abilities onto the wearer. So, for example, the Tiki emblem transforms the wearer into a dragon creature when activated and gives them the ability Divine Heart, granting them an extra life after their health runs out. Emblem Lin can let you attack from a great distance, goes good with archer units, that sort of thing. You can mix and match and test various combinations to find a combination that suits your playstyle, so there's a lot more tactical flexibility involved. You can also increase bonds with them to get access to the abilities that you can then apply to your units. There's a lot of stuff, which I think gives Engage a slightly sharper spoon in this arbitrary basement cage match I'm putting these two games through. Shares from Free Hubs isn't here though. they don't get to be an emblem, so screw them, I guess. Emblems appear to be from the cast of previous games, so I don't really have a ton to say about them, but I do have questions about them, namely, what the hell are these things? So, Engage claims that they're beings from another world, called to this one to serve the Divine Dragon, but in the very final battle, which, hey, Engage, fantastic storytelling right there, not telling me important information about one of the central aspects of the world you're making until it's just about to not matter. We learned that they're not the actual person, but a sort of spirit based on them? Apparently that's never explained in any more detail, I'm lost on the exact specifics. But they all have memories, and those that served together in the past seem to recognize each other and act as I assume they did in their respective games. While the emblems can bond with characters, they can't seem to bond with one another, which is kind of a shame. Anyway, next question. What is the criteria for becoming an emblem exactly? Who decides who gets to become an emblem? Emblems can do this exactly once in the story and explicitly stated that they can't do it again, so it's clearly not them who decides this. Byleth shows up, only in a male version and only talking about characters he could know on one specific route, so is that the canon route? It is stated that there are infinite universes in Fire Emblem, so is this Byleth just from a dimension where he took that particular route? But then what makes this one so particularly special? Why is there one where Edelgard, Dimitri and Claude all cohabit one together? Do they not fight? That's kind of the whole point of Three Houses, so which one of them won? What is the deal with these things? So my headcanon is that unless there's an obvious contradiction like Three Hopes, which obviously didn't happen at the same time as Three Houses, is that every single Fire Emblem game takes place in the same universe with the exception of Engage, which takes place in a completely separate reality. If there are infinite universes, then this must be true in at least one of them, so screw you, Engage. We were supposed to be talking about the gameplay, weren't we? Well, that's the thing, I kind of have been this entire time. This is perhaps the biggest gameplay difference between Engage and Three Houses. What they choose to focus on. See, Three Houses is very big on social sim interactions. They're an immensely important aspect not only to the creation of a vibrant world that gets you to care about the characters and said world, but these interactions are central to the main story of the game. Engage chooses to focus on the battle aspect far more, with most of its mechanics tying themselves back into that. And that is where a lot of the issues with Engage arise, because frankly, Fire Emblem's combat doesn't need any tweaking at this stage outside of balancing and the same kind of adjustments that nearly any game needs after it's launched. Engaging adds a bit more tactical flexibility, but nothing that couldn't be adjusted in other ways. What it needs is another hook, and that's what Three Houses understood, hence why it focused itself around more social sim aspects. This is one of Three Houses' strengths, and one of Engage's biggest weaknesses. Let's talk about how, starting with the hub worlds. Now, the hub world is where a lot of Three Houses comes together. If you don't know what a hub is, here's a quick rundown. A hub in a game is basically a place where you can access other parts of the game. Think of it kind of like a level selector, but you have to actually interact with the level itself in order to get to the subsequent level. Example of hub worlds in games includes the Normandy from the Mass Effect series, Skyhold in Dragon Age Inquisition, Peach's Castle in Super Mario 64, the Gathering Hub in Monster Hunter World, or the headquarters in XCOM Enemy Unknown. Hub worlds are good for role-playing games in particular because they can let you interact with other characters and develop a rapport with them. It also helps to create the feel of a world which is reacting to your choices as a player. Between Three Houses and Engage, Three Houses has the significantly better hub world. The first thing is the Garreg Mach is simply a far more interesting location. It's a monastery located at the point where three rival nations all meet, acting as a sort of neutral ground for all three of them. It's the seat of power for the church, the fourth great power on Fodlan, but which doesn't control territory in the same way that the others do. And from it, each nation sends students to the Officers Academy, meaning that the future rulers will be interacting with one another on roughly equal footing on a regular basis during their time there. And this is all done under the watchful eye of the church. Just on a basic level, Garreg Mach is a fascinating location from a world building perspective. As more and more secrets about the world of Three Houses are exposed, the existence of the building takes on additional meanings when under scrutiny. For example, the church being present at the monastery allows them to subtly influence and control the fates of the three nations by educating and at times manipulating the future leaders. In the Cindered Shadows storyline, the existence of a city underneath the monastery known as the Abyss is also revealed to exist, and that casts a further negative light on the church because they're the ones that forced them into this place. Garreg Mach is also in a highly defensible geographic location, making it a valuable piece of real estate for any of the three nations, if they were to control it. Its location at the center of things makes it an incredibly strategic location for launching invasions into each other's territory. Finally, it's also the site of a large number of conspiracies. Different groups make their moves in and around Garreg Mach due to all of these factors. This makes it not only the hub world for the player, but a central piece in the mystery and stories of this continent. Because of all of these factors, it's central to the politics, religion, military affairs, and trade in Fodlan, and due to that, Garreg Mach is heavily integrated into the overall story of Three Houses. You react to the consequences, you interact with the house leaders, you see as the political games and machinations unfold right in front of you. There's also an in-universe reason for you to be in this hub world at all. Byleth is a teacher at the academy, and the majority of characters that you will play as are either students or faculty at the monastery, which gives them all an actual reason to return to it once you complete a mission. They basically live there. When the academy phase is over and it transitions into the war phase about halfway through the game, Garreg Mach becomes a military stronghold and an operations center, central towards each side winning the conflict. Again, this gives the characters a reason to return there at the end of major campaigns. The monastery is always central to the story and thus never stops being a place of intrigue. The Somniel acts as the hub of Engage and nothing happens there. The Somniel is a floating island, and seemingly because of that, nothing happens to it. Not until the very end when you fly it into a portal. You'd think that a floating island would have some interesting aspects to it, but it just doesn't. There's never an attack on the Somniel, nor ever really much of a risk of one happening, so there's no tension surrounding it. There are all these buildings and facilities that are just there, but they're empty and abandoned until you find vendors for the market stalls, and other party members to even inhabit the island. Prior to Ayla waking up, it was just Vandar, Clan, and Fram here. It's so empty, there's no feel of any history or really even a purpose for any of it to exist. From a mechanical standpoint, sure, but from a story perspective, this entire island existed to house Ayla while they slept. What in the world did the Stewards of the Dragon need 4 market stalls ready-made for? And if they were that badly needed, why aren't they being used before Ayla shows up? Did another steward have them built? I don't know, there's not even a mention of the other stewards before the ones you meet. This place feels like barely anyone has lived here. The fact that it's a floating island seems like it's mostly for the spectacle of the things, but it raises multiple questions. Getting to and from it is a weird affair. I'm willing to just accept the idea that they just use magic to get back to the Somniel, but I'm not entirely clear on how they get off the Somniel. I assume magic again, but like, does it only take them to Lethos, or are they like magic portals on just about every single checkpoint on the map? If that's the case, why do we have to physically walk to the Pyrenees-Brodian border in Chapter 7? Why couldn't we just teleport to the Somniel and then teleport to the Brodian castle? Or do they not have magic portals, meaning that they have to get off the Somniel, potentially cross Lethos, load up everything onto a ship, and then go back along the route that they came through in the first place to get to the next destination? Now, this one is a nitpick, I'll grant you that, but it is worth pointing out that in Three Houses, I don't feel the need to ask this question whatsoever. A lot of the time too, going back to the Somniel feels weird. There'll be heated moments in the story such as the Queen of Firene being held hostage by an invading army, or you're in a race against time to destroy binding crystals before the Big Bad's plan can go into effect, or you're rushing to save the King of Brodia, and you can just go hang out on the Somniel for a while, use the pool, tend to the orchard and the stable to get a meal, do some training and exercise, maybe start that book you've been meaning to get into. Just chill for a while. Don't mind the horrendous implied torture that's going on while you go and enjoy a campfire sing-along. Hell, a lot of the times, characters who are relevant to the story beat that you're on will actively tell you that they're anxious about just hanging out while their families are in danger, but they won't do anything. They'll just wait until you're good and ready. And it does raise the question of why you would ever go back. From a storytelling perspective, this could have been avoided, I feel, by having a scene where it's explained that there are magic portals, but Ayla has to use their divine dragon powers to reactivate them. This would address that issue, and also make going back to the Somniel feel a lot less weird, and make it also feel like a centralized location within the world. Characters can just jump back and forth using the Somniel as a sort of springboard location. Even just using them to have the cast go from the royal castles of each nation would have done wonders for this. That could help to reframe the moments on the Somniel, where story-relevant characters are freaking out as just them waiting for the army to get ready to jump into their next fight. There were solutions to this issue, but Engage doesn't even seem to realise that this is an issue. This is what I mean when I say that Garreg Mach is better integrated into the story. If some characters are just dicking around, it's understandable because they live at the monastery. They might just be relaxing on the day off, but there's no real story reason to go back to the Somniel basically ever. It's borderline irrelevant. But there is also so much to do with the Somniel, especially if you want to get supports with characters. Every so often there are these glowing dust patches, which are items that you can pick up for meal ingredients or for gifts that you can give to characters. You can change animals in the nearby farms so that they can give you different ingredients. You can go on a wyvern ride. You can exercise to gain temporary stat increases. You can play with Somi, this spirit thing whose existence is never elaborated on. You can get tarot readings or train or rest to get unique wake-up events with each of the characters. There's just so much to do, but there's no reason to actually do it. You can get rewards, but they're barely worth the effort. But even if they were, they just feel so out of place. There's a war going on and people are being slaughtered en masse by zombie warriors, and yet there's no sense of urgency about anything either. I'm not taking the day off to rest and recuperate while others plan our next move. I'm just digging around for a while, and the world will just wait until I'm good and ready to continue. It's so bizarre to me. It's like Engage doesn't seem to understand how people would behave in an active war and just couldn't be bothered to write in immersive reasons for anyone doing anything. Speaking about there being too much to do though, this lets me segue into what may be my absolute favourite mechanic of Free Houses: the clock and the calendar. I say this without any exaggeration, I'm completely serious about this. The clock and the calendar mechanic in Free Houses is the single greatest mechanic in the entire Fire Emblem series. How it works is, you start a new chapter at the beginning of the month. During the week, you're teaching your classes. You start each week on a Monday, and during this you will interact with your students. You can tutor them personally, assign jobs to them, and sometimes they will come to you with questions or requests, with which you can engage for extra support points. This is suggested to be what you do throughout the entire week. Then during the week, something might come up, like a story beat or a support conversation. Then, on the Sunday of each week, you're given free time to do basically whatever you want. You have a few options for what you can do. As I explained, you can explore the monastery to speak with characters, go to the market, complete odd jobs around the place, increase supports with others by finding these golden dust things I mentioned, which in Free Houses are lost items that you can return to get a support boost. You can also just give them gifts or host tea parties or otherwise just interact with them. If you choose to explore, you have a fair few options. If you don't fancy doing that, then you can go on missions outside the monastery. These are framed as missions, such as clearing out bandits or doing training exercises. Sometimes, if you have compatible characters or have a high enough support, you can do a prologue, a personal mission for each character. Hosting a seminar where you and some students learn from another professor is also an option and a way to gain experience in certain skills. Or you can just rest for that week to skip it if you really want to. Except that option also has some hidden depths to it. At one point, Byleth gets given the extendo sword from the intro sequence. Okay, you know what, I should definitely reword that. So stick with me on it. Stick is also not a word that you want to hear when talking about being given an extendo sword. I should just... The Sword of the Creator is an incredibly powerful and legendary weapon that Byleth gets due to having a rare crest, a unique ability that we'll talk about later, which is required to utilize it. It's a strong weapon, but it wears down the more you use it. If you choose to rest for a week, then the sword will recover some of its durability, allowing you to use it again in the battlefield if it was depleted. But stepping back for a moment, there are two options here that I want to look at a bit more in depth: the Explore the Monastery option and the Battle option. If you select either of these options, then you will get given a little bar at the top of the screen with a number at the top. These are your action points. How they work is, certain activities will take up action points. Say you choose to explore, and you want to share a meal with two characters. This takes up an action point. Tournaments will also take up an action point, so we'll going to the church to sing in choirs, or getting training from a member of the faculty, or going to the sauna, or any number of things. So let's say that you have 3 action points. You can only do 3 of the things before you can't do any more. Same with battles too. If you want to battle during the week, you would only get a certain number of action points, meaning that you could only do so many battles that week. Now, you can increase the number of action points that you can get by increasing your professor level, which you get by engaging in various other, sometimes non-action point spending activities, such as fishing or cultivating plants. Some action point spending activities do also give you professor level experience, like sharing a meal. If you want to eke out as many professor experience points as possible, then you'll likely do what I did. Buy all the bait that you can, and spend like an hour fishing to get as many professor experience points as possible. However, you'll also learn that you can only do so much of that per month. Then you'll have to wait until the next month before you can get more. The same occurs when giving gifts to your supports. You can buy gifts from the merchants, but only so many per month. Now, there are any number of reasons why you might want to go to these extremes. The main one being that after you've selected a house to lead, a bunch of other characters are unplayable due to being in different houses. If you have a support with them or you have a high enough stat, then you can recruit them into your house and thus make them playable. You only have until the war stage to do this though. After that, they'll be lost to you. You may even have to fight and kill them. You may also just want to give yourself the best possible chance to up your supports with as many characters as you can possibly manage. You may want to complete as many battles as you can so as not to miss any. But if you want to do this, then again, you'll be like me. You'll spend a ton of time trying to get every possible professor point that you can. So that's a lot of complex interconnecting mechanics, but it all leads to one thing. You will, at some point, run out of things to do at Garreg Mach, and you will be forced to end the week in order to be able to do more things. And when that happens, you get closer to the end of the month. And at the end of the month, you are given an official mission. And that acts as the story mission. The reason that the clock and calendar mechanics are so good and why I adore them so much is because they force you to never stop engaging with the story. The world is moving completely independently of you. There's only so many things that you can do before the story forcefully grabs you and takes you onto the next plot point. It effectively forces you to come to the understanding that you cannot complete everything in one run. It's almost designed to force you to pick what you want to focus on and understand that you won't be able to get to do everything. But in doing so, it means that if you're like me, and you're one of those I will 100% everything that is presented to me types, the game is basically conditioning you into accepting that you won't be able to do all of that. Well, you can, but you're going to be putting in some bloody work for it. By forcing limits onto the player and ensuring that no matter what, the story will continue regardless of if you're ready, you never end up forgetting about the plot. It's always there in front of you, playing out whether you want it to or not. It creates tension where you know that you have to manage your time efficiently and carefully, and it maintains a sense of urgency as the plot comes speeding towards you and you can't stop it. Only prepare for it. And it's glorious for it. I'll give you an example. There's a part in Three Houses where one of the people who lives at the monastery, Flayn, goes missing. Garreg Mach goes into an upheaval trying to find her, and there's a place where you can go and immediately find her. You can, however, opt to not do that and spend the rest of the month going on as normal, which, by the way, I'd recommend because losing a month can mean losing a lot of training and a lot of support points. Now, no matter what you choose to do, you will find Flayn safe and sound. I will say I do think that it would have been more interesting if there were more divergent points here, but here's the difference. In Engage, there's a point where you get given a crystal, and this crystal is full of magic. We're told that it has to be used within a few hours or it will become worthless. But I can spend literally weeks of in-game time screwing around and nothing will happen. In both situations, the story is the same, sure, but Three Houses at the very least has the guts to say, alright, you've dicked around long enough, you're going to get back into this story whether you like it or not. Three Houses is benefited story-wise by this because it shows that the world is moving regardless of your actions and people are still doing things even if you're not. You are the center of the universe and time does not wait for you. Engage does not have the confidence in its own narrative to do this. And rightly bloody so, but we'll be getting into that before long. See, if you're like me, when you realized that there was no clock and calendar mechanic in Engage, you went, great, that means I can 100% the support between me, the other characters, and ensure that every character X has a support with every character Y too. And then you spent one solid week doing nothing but getting all the supports for every single character in the game, and then you realized, wow, I am bored out of my skull. I forgot what's even happening in the story. Some evil dragon bloke or something or rubber. Who even cares anymore? It was exhausting, and I hated it. The clock and the calendar mechanic is well designed to prevent this frustration. You don't really understand that until all the features are taken away, and you're left with the utter tedium. In other words, you don't realize how valuable these systems are until you've played Fire Emblem Engage. In short, the reason I adore the clock and calendar mechanic is because it does two things. One being that it helps to make the world feel like it's moving along independent of your actions, and it prevents the player from ever feeling disengaged with the story. One way or another, the story will continue and it's on you to make sure that you're ready for it, rather than holding up the entire world while you do 100 pointless battles of some stats and supports. Speaking about the supports though, I think that I should talk about them next. Now, as I've mentioned, supports are a mechanic between the player character and a party member. They can also exist between party members. They're meant to represent the emotional connection between the two units. As I've said, these supports can have an impact on gameplay, but the primary reason to bother with them is the relationship aspect of things, because that's where the most interesting bits reside. There are generally 4 levels of support. C rank, the lowest, B rank, A rank, which in most cases is the highest. Then you can have S rank. This usually indicates a romantic relationship and is unique to the player character. Listen here, this series is a romance simulator with a grid-based strategy game tacked on, and that's the way we fucking like it. Anyway, you can increase supports in a variety of ways, from having them fight alongside one another in adjacent spaces to having them do activities together, like sharing a meal, or you can give them gifts. Which I want to talk about specifically for a moment because it's yet another example of the mechanics being more thought out in Free Houses than in N-Gage. You'll recall that I mentioned that you can buy gifts from the merchants, but there's only so many of them per month. Well, this is built upon further by the favourite gifts mechanic. How that works is certain characters will appreciate certain types of gifts. You can learn about the preferences of each character in their profiles and then give them the corresponding gift in order to get a major support boost. Since you only have so many gifts a month, it's smart to figure out what each character likes. In N-Gage, you unlock a flea market about halfway through the game. Here's what you do. Ignore the favourite gift mechanic entirely. A lot of characters' favourite gifts can cost a fair bit of gold, like 400 a pop. Ignore them. Find the cheapest gift you can, which is usually a flower for 20 gold, buy like 100 of them, and make sure that the person you're giving them to doesn't actively dislike flowers. Then just keep giving them flowers and you can rack up the ALA supports pretty much instantly and for much, much cheaper. I feel like I shouldn't even need to explain why this is a problem, but in case I do, not only does this make these relationships feel very transactional, I also don't have to bother learning anything about these people. I can just throw things at them and they'll love me. Then again, Ayla is a divine dragon, I don't have to do anything and they'll love me. Maybe that's a blessing in disguise. Like I said, getting all of the support in the first place was a nightmare, so maybe it's good that I can break the game like this. Maybe I should hope for other methods of breaking the game to get supports quickly between other characters. But anyway, let's just move on to the actual supports themselves. Each time that you get a support level, you get a little cutscene, which will often show the characters talking or otherwise just interacting. These are often where the characters are at their most interesting and endearing because it shows what really makes the characters tick, and how they would interact with someone with a seriously different personality than their own. Now, supports are where my feelings between Free Houses and N-Gage do get complicated because I think that there are serious pros and cons to each game's approach. Let's start with N-Gages, and in particular Alar's, because this is easily the worst aspect. So I mentioned that I had an issue with the whole divine dragon Alar as a god thing, right? Now, I don't inherently dislike this. I hold true to the belief that anything, if well written, can be interesting or fun, or at the bare minimum not actively painful. The issue is that, as a figure of faith for the overwhelming majority of people in this world, everyone is extra special nice to Alar and defer to them and literally worship the ground they walk on. They basically work from a position of "you're my god" and hold nothing but utter reverence for Alar, despite Alar not doing anything of particular note in front of them. And that makes the supports between Alar and a lot of the characters very boring, to put it bluntly. That's it. That's kind of the issue of Alar supports. They're boring. They're mostly just deferral and kind, no bad vibes. And it creates a situation where Alar feels rather stilted and doesn't have that many unique relationships because they're all basically the same. Here's what happens in the vast majority of Alar's supports. In the C rank, Alar's support starts out relatively nice. In the B rank, they get into an extremely minor conflict, and then in the A rank, everything is resolved and they go right back to how they were in the C rank. There are very few exceptions to this. Compare this to Free Houses, where you can have far more sporadic relationships with people. There are characters that outright like Byleth, like Bernadetta and Edelgard, but others, like Sedith, borderline outright hates you from the get-go. Leonie, a girl from a poor village who was semi-taught by Gerald, basically resents Byleth for, from their perspective, not having any idea how good they had it. Hubert is deeply skeptical and at one point basically says, "If you mess with Edelgard, I am straight up going to end you." No, I'm not exaggerating, he'll just openly consider how to assassinate Byleth right in front of them, and then gets mildly upset when they're not even remotely intimidated. The clock and calendar mechanic makes itself known once again here. Free Houses will actually prevent you from getting an A rank support until you're in the war phase, and even then with certain characters you have to be on their side. And the time difference between the academy period and the war period is 5 years. By the time you've reached an A rank support with him, Hubert has fully come around to Byleth, putting an immense amount of faith in them, and even considering them to be an equal of sorts. A turnover that took 5 years to get to, which creates not only the sense of time progressing, but also of the emotional and personal development that each character is undergoing, even when they're not on screen. And that right there is what makes Hubert fascinating. Byleth's relationship develops with him. It changes and grows. They earn Hubert's respect. And that happens with a lot of Free Houses characters. Remember when I said you could pick dialogue options in Free Houses? Well, there are some options that you can pick which will actually lower your support with a character. Now, this is pissing in the wind, to be frank, because between battles, teaching, gift giving, and everything else, there's more than enough opportunities to regain that lost support point. But it at least makes it feel like I'm engaging with a character who has likes and dislikes. It's possible for me to upset them. It's possible for Byleth to upset Hubert, but for him to still come around to respect Byleth. The absolute worst is it helps to build a greater sense of camaraderie. No, we don't agree on everything, but we're still comrades in arms at the end of the day. And that supersedes any superficial conflicts that we have. Just this small addition, even if it's ultimately meaningless, helps to create a sense of a dynamic relationship. Now what they should do is have negative supports where characters just despise each other just for a laugh. With Aylar and Engage, basically no one goes from disliking Aylar to liking them. Aylar rarely earns anyone's respect, they have it more or less from the moment they meet anyone. Comes with being a deity, I suppose, which is why I keep having issues with that. I'd probably have the same issue with royalty as well, I suspect. You'd be afforded a hell of a lot of respect by way of being a royal in these games, especially with how royalty is portrayed in the Fire Emblem series, but at least royalty is rarely the subject of religious worship. It happens, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot less frequent. I don't think that my immortal soul is dependent on King Charles caring for me all that much, which is just as well because I don't care much for him, either the monarchist fuck. There's basically nothing you can do to upset anyone. You can literally give them horse manure. No, I'm not exaggerating, the item is literally called horse manure. You can give it to people, but it doesn't impact your supports. Some characters even like it. What the hell do I have to do to piss you people off? Now, to be totally fair, there are some supports with Ayla that are interesting and entertaining. Zelkov, for example, is a character that has a very particular way of speaking and has hobbies based on basically everything. By the time Ayla reaches A rank with him, they're copying the way he speaks just to screw with him. That's good. That's bloody funny. More of that, please. Sadly, this is the exception rather than the rule. But on the flip side, it is mostly just Ayla where this happens. A lot of the supports between other characters are downright some of the best aspects of this game. The relationships and dynamics are a lot more varied between them than they are with Ayla, from Zelkov and Ivy basically admitting that they hate each other, to becoming more friendly with one another over time, to Vander and Clan clashing over the duties of a steward, to Baron and Chloe obviously flirting with one another. Like, this isn't even a hot take in the Engaged community, we've all just wordlessly agreed that these two are into each other, right? Well, there's another gripe that I have. In Three Houses, some characters can only reach B support with other characters. For example, Dorothea and Ingrid can only reach support B, while Dorothea and Petra can get to support A. The reason for this is that when you get your ending, the game will tailor the fates of each character depending on who they had the highest support with. And those rankings, to be fair, seem somewhat random. Some only go up to B, some have B+, some have A+. It's strange, but the overall gist is this. Say, for example, Bernadetta had the highest support with Yuri and it was A ranked. They will end up getting married. In the case of this not being a romantic option, such as Happy and Constance, then it will refer to them as being lifelong friends. Or Hubert and Ferdinand, who become highly valued advisors who spend years working together. Basically, it shows that the bonds between characters grew strong enough that they continued to stay in contact after the war, and that changed the course of their lives. This can get confusing and completely arbitrary if you have multiple A-rank supports, so the DLC for Three Houses added a fortune teller where you could basically assign who ended up with who if you wanted. Not to worry though, we will get to the DLCs of both of these delightful experiences. Now in Engage, every character who can have a support with a character can get that support up to A rank. You may have wondered why I bothered if I found the process utterly boring and tedious by the end. Well, this is why I went to all the trouble of making sure I got everyone up to A rank. I wanted to see if it would change endings once I did that. For all the negative things that I have said and will say about Engage, I had gotten attached to a lot of these characters. A lot of them are fun and leave an impression. I may not have wanted to romance a lot of them, but I still wanted them to get their happy endings, and I was operating under the belief that the higher supports that they had, the better their chances of that would be. You can tell where this is going, can't you? You want to know how that changed any character's endings? It didn't. In the game with a C rank support, A rank support, or no support whatsoever, they will end up in the same places regardless. Doesn't matter. Let me tell you, realizing all the time that I spent getting A ranks for everyone amounted to nothing did not leave me in the best of moods. I was quite irritated, to tell you the truth. There aren't even any paired endings for any character other than Ayla. I know for a fact that the ability to pair characters off is a long-standing one in the Fire Emblem series, so I'm not even sure why the other characters can't. Who in the world was watching all the praises for Three Houses and went, man, people sure do love pairing up all these unique, well-written and dynamic characters, but you know what I think they'd love even more? Not doing the thing that they like doing. What was even the logic there? Who even perceived that that would be a good idea? Like, normally I feel like I can at least see what the developers were going for, or why they made a change, or just write it off as me being way too over-analytical and recognizing that when they do something like, say, leaving and returning to the Somnia, that it doesn't really matter and I'm just being a pedantic sod. But this, I can't even comprehend who thought that this was a good idea. Why would you remove one of the most interesting aspects of the series? If the concern was that giving everyone an A rank would make who ended up with who tricky, then having a choose who hooks up with who system would have fixed this. The tarot card building is right there. You could have, that would have been perfect. Or have a final mission where you do a Mass Effect style deal where characters that you want to go together end up tackling certain aspects of the mission, or do a pre-final battle party or something. God, their fates get worse too. Alfred, right? Unless you go down the S-rank route with him, apparently he dies young. He was born with medical issues as a child, and unless you go S-rank with him, he croaks at a young age. Wow, that's grim. Hey, here's an idea, Engage. How about we reserve that for if I have no support rank with him whatsoever, and if I get a support rank C with him, he falls in battle, and if I get an A rank support with him, he relies on his friends for help and lives until a ripe old age. That would also go with the theme of this bloody story. Give me something to work with on these supports, Engage. Anything. As it stands, the only reason to get all A rank supports for everyone is completionist's sake. And also to get a few extra points to hit, dodge and damage, which is not the greatest exchange of the sheer amount of time I put into doing it. Had I known that this was the case ahead of time, I may not have bothered. Like I said, the only real impact that you can have on a character's ending and Engage is getting an S rank. And to do this, you get the Pact Ring, which you can give to anyone without restrictions. Having no restrictions is something I do like. In Three Houses, I remember I wanted to romance Bernadetta because, like, look at the girl. Look at this bundle of anxiety. This girl just needs a hug and to be told that everything is going to be okay. Only I was playing as female Byleth, so her S-rank support was arbitrarily cut off without any warning or ability to know that this was going to happen ahead of time. What's that? You wanted to romance this character? Nope, can't do that. You chose wrong at the start. How were you meant to know that? You weren't. Fuck you. Anyway. It's like playing Mass Effect all over again. Let me romance Tali for Christ's sake. I don't want to play as male Shepard. His voice is boring. So I do appreciate Engage realizing that this was annoying and just letting me give the thing to whoever I wanted. Okay, when I said I didn't want any restrictions, I didn't mean that I was a right-wing libertarian game. Thankfully, in some cases, the bond ring is a platonic gesture, though, again, the game doesn't convey which ones are meant to be romantic other than your own vibes, I guess? I don't understand why the game won't tell you this, but okay, fine, I'll roll with it. You might be wondering who I ended up romancing in both of these games in that case. Well, in Three Houses, there were a lot of characters I liked but couldn't picture a romance with. Casper, for instance. Love that guy. He's enthusiastic, he's forthright, he wears his heart on his sleeve, he's not the kind of person to just sit around when something bad is happening. He's a good dude. Could not see a romance with him. Whatsoever. Same with Lindhart and Petra. Couldn't do it. It honestly ended up being a toss-up between Hubert, Dorothea and Edelgard. I ended up going with Edelgard and she can count herself lucky I wasn't physically allowed to go with Bernadetta because so help me if I've been allowed to. In Engage there were a lot more characters that I was willing to go down a romance road with, and they seem to be tailored more specifically for if a player wants to romance them. Timera because I admire the free spirit and incredibly friendly attitude, Ivy because their story is interesting and the conflict they feel between their faith and duty to their nation and the interactions with Alar are far more interesting than most. Zelkov because, I'll be honest, the guy makes me laugh and he's got that brooding loner but is good with kids and adores them thing, which is cute. Kagetsu because he's just a nice guy, he's just super friendly, he's nice, he's a good boy. Vakado because I guess I have a thing for the Psalm twins, but again, he's mostly just a super friendly and chill guy. If there was one character I didn't expect to have any fond feelings for, it was Pandreo, but here we are. Merrin because they go for that cool persona, but then put animals in front of her and she starts rambling about her hyperfixation, which I find adorable. Not while I would have considered Merrin if she wasn't obviously flirting with Chloe. But to be honest, for me, it wasn't even close in the end. I went with Yanaka.
Hiya, papaya.
Hey yo, Papa Yo to you too, easily the most interesting companion in this entire game by far. Yanaka's great, and is one of the reasons I'm convinced there was at least one person involved in the creation of Engage who knew what the hell they were doing. They're the type of character that you really want in a series like this, and I've chosen them because genuinely I think that their supports are some of the best Engage has to offer. Yanaka first shows up acting like they're completely lost and happen to stumble across an emblem ring. You help them deal with bandits that stole it, Ayla activates the ring, the emblem fights alongside Yanaka, and after that she admits that she stole the ring from one of its hidden altars. Despite this, Yanaka joins the Divine Dragon's army. There's a lot to Yanaka. She's fairly close-lipped about where she comes from. She has these verbal quirks that litter her dialogue. She's super peppy and has a massive love of weapons. She's also very good at impressions, to the point where I'm genuinely not sure if they got the relevant voice actors to do their lines for Yunaka, or if Yunaka's voice actor is just doing the impressions themselves and is that good. Also, she does roosters when trying to wake up Alar.
Hi.
I would burn entire nations to protect Yunaka, although I don't think she needs my protection that much, to be honest. One of the best bits about her is how her character is tied into the mechanics of the game. There's this thing where if a character gets a critical hit, they may have a line of dialogue. As I said, Yunaka's dialogue is normally very upbeat, but when she gets a critical hit, her voice just drops.
You're dead.
The first time this happened, I was convinced I'd misheard something. Then it happened again, and this ended up being the first glimpse into the fact that Yunaka's primary personality is very much a front. In some supports, glimpses of that facade begin to show. With Fagado, she refers to herself as having forgotten to put her act on because he approached her so quick and out of nowhere. With Zelkov, he inquires to her if they have had similar careers, something which Yunaka confirms but never elaborates on. In one with Alfred, she says to him directly that while she knows he wants them to be friends, she can't answer questions about her past and doesn't want to lie to him, but if put into that situation, she absolutely will, because that's preferable to her than the alternative. There's an amusing one she has with Merrin, where Merrin keeps trying to do these standoff monologues in training because she thinks they're cool, and Yunaka is like, no, stop that, you are going to get yourself killed, and outright refuses to engage with Merrin. She just walks away. But with her support with Citrine in particular, we learned that Yunaka used to be an assassin, forced into the role by someone who took her in off the streets to get easy money out of her. Not a lot of people expect a child assassin, so she was good at it. Yunaka isn't even her birth name, but that's the reason she lies. Because of all the royalty around her, there's a pretty high likelihood she was involved in something that got someone they know killed. There's a non-0% chance that Yunaka specifically was the one to do it. Each one of these scenes also goes towards building up not only Yunaka, but the other members of the cast as well. Fagado enjoys his parties, but he feels bad about dragging Yunaka out because during it, he learned that she has a dislike of crowds, but it becomes something that they work on together. Yunaka complains about Alfred being too nice and feeling that it's unfair, and he says, then let it be unfair, I don't care. And Citrine, the reason that she confronted Yunaka was because she thought that she planned on assassinating a Brodian noble due to her seeking out information about formal balls that the nobility were attending, but it turns out Yunaka wanted to start a fund for children who were impacted by the war so they don't end up like her. And Citrine tries to make it up to Yunaka by giving her all the information that she can. These are why supports are so good in these games. They develop both characters in a one-on-one setting to see how they bounce off of one another, creating a feeling of the army becoming more and more closely knit. But also to help world build in ways that the main story simply can't do with the time and narrative that it's trying to go over. Yunaka is basically the perfect example of what supports can do for a character in this series, and that's why I've chosen to focus on her. Whoever it is on the writing team that seems to be utterly obsessed with the royalty in these games needs to either be fired or take a history course. Speaking as someone who comes from a land that has a long history with royalty, they're really not that interesting. It's characters like Yunaka and the supports that they get which are the most fascinating. So it really wasn't even much of a question as to who I ended up giving the Bond ring to. It didn't reveal any information about her that I didn't already know, but by that point, I didn't need to know anything more about her. I could do an entire essay on why I love Yunaka in particular, but let's not get too distracted now. When they're being done like this, Engage has some of the best supports. They're anywhere from charming and amusing to utterly hilarious. There are ones that suck though. Linden and Saphir for instance. Saphir is a Brodian soldier who has this trauma of losing her home village to an Elusian raid at a young age, and Linden is a former soldier for Elusia, and they set it up like Linden was directly involved in the raid against Saphir's home, only they didn't say, nah, he wasn't, he was involved in the war though. Which, way to make this less interesting, Engage. At its worst, Engage seems unwilling to commit to some of its more interesting ideas. In Three Houses, these ideas are explored. Casper's father was involved in a war against Brigid, of which Petra is the heir to, and it's revealed that Casper's father killed Petra's father. And that's explored. They don't back down from it, they don't shy away from it, they actually engage with the interesting dynamics of play. I can pick and choose supports I like and ones I don't like for hours on end, but if I had to give the supports for Engage one broad critique, it would be this. They are utterly disconnected from the rest of the story. This is a bit of a trickier point, so bear with me for a moment. In Three Houses, everyone is either a student or faculty of Garreg Mach. A lot of the supports reflect this. There are members of the nobility and royal families, and the commoners who live within that world. They all talk about issues that they faced at one point or another to help build up Fodlan and add context to the conflict that they're in. That, or at the absolute least, they will refer generally to the fact that these characters are at a monastery for a reason. One example I like is Bernadetta and Ingrid. At one point, Ingrid literally kicks Bernadetta's door down to get her to go and train. That's the reason they're at the monastery. They're members of the Officers' Academy. A lot of the supports in Engage feel rather detached from the fact that there's a war going on. The war is mentioned and referenced, but it doesn't really seem to be on anyone's mind all that much. A lot of them are amusing, don't get me wrong, but they make the war feel like it's barely even a thing to consider. There are supports in Three Houses that are not only very focused on the conflicts, but will even take place during skirmishes and battles. Hubert and Shamira, for instance, are seen protecting one another or doing tasks that are directly related to the war effort. Meanwhile, in Engage, a support for Ivy and Panette goes, "Let's go to a haunted house." Forgive me if I'm not exactly getting a sense of urgency here or understanding the threat that the corrupted apparently pose. It doesn't really seem to be stopping anyone from just going about their days and normal lives. The only support I can even recall being related to the corrupted in any real way off the top of my head is one between Aylar and Diamant. Other than that, no one else even really seems to care too much. I'm not saying that fun supports are a bad thing, but the ones in Engage just feel totally disconnected from basically everything. Even ones with Edelgard and Three Houses that have next to nothing to do with the war at least make mention of the fact that it's a quiet moment that she doesn't normally get. The problem is that Three Houses writes like a bunch of people who were growing closer while at war, and Engage writes like a bunch of people who are just hanging out together. And that makes the rest of the game's narrative feel both hollow and utterly unfocused. Okay, what else have I got here? I suppose I should talk about the DLCs for each game. Oh boy. The DLCs of both games are bullshit. The way that they work is that at a certain point in the story, the player can choose to do DLCs at more or less any time. In the case of Three Houses, this is basically any time after you join the academy, but for Engage you can do this pretty much up until the final mission. My advice, do them early as possible. The main reason that you do these DLCs is to get access to the new characters, so if you do them sooner, then you get access to them sooner and get to see more of the content that was made for them, like dialogue options and the opportunity to increase support sooner. If you do Cindered Shadows before the war period, you get to recruit the new cast into your house, so do them as soon as you can if you want to get the most out of them. There is barely even a point in going into the stories of them. Frankly, the story of these DLCs barely matters when put into the wider context of their respective games, so we're going to skim over them. The Three Houses story is called Cindered Shadows, and it goes over the story of Abyss, a town under Garreg Mach, and introduces 4 characters called the Ashen Wolves: Yuri, Balthus, Happy, and Constance. There's some crest stuff and treachery, and there the dead hardly matters. Basically, some weird dude is upset that Byleth's mother died and so tries to bring her back from beyond the grave by stealing the blood of the Ashen Wolves, and now you understand why I'm skimming it, because what the hell am I meant to add to that? The cast is fun though, I will say that. The 4 characters you get to add to your roster afterwards are a lot of fun. My personal favourite is probably Constance, who appears to have environmentally dependent dissociative identity disorder, where if she's in the shade, she's this haughty and arrogant if well-meaning noble, and if she's in the light, then she becomes this deeply defaced, crestfallen woman who will quite readily suggest using her corpse as a shield in situations it is not even remotely necessary. It is quite funny. It means that seeing her used in different environments gives you different dynamics to work with, but all of them are a lot of fun. Now, the Engage story is called the Xenologue, and Ayla basically gets transported to the mirror dimension. A bit of context I feel is needed before going into this. So there are these recurring villains in Engage called the Four Hounds, and by the end of the game, 3 of them are dead and 1 of them joins your side. The Xenologue basically recreates these characters as the Four Winds, and they're essentially mirrors of the Four Hounds. The one that would join you in the Prime universe gets crushed, so you get the other 3. To be totally honest with you, while it is tempting to write the Four Winds off as just the Four Hounds but opposites, there's actually enough characterization in them that I actually caught myself becoming endeared to them, and a lot of effort goes into establishing via their supports that these aren't the same people. They are different individuals, and not just replacements for their Prime World counterparts, and they don't want to be either. Just that little bit of extra character does wonders for them. So, you know what? I'm willing to give them a pass. You also get 2 characters called Nell and Nil, 2 twins who are the children of this world Sombron who turned against him, meaning they're Fell Dragons. I will actually give Engage this. I think that the Fell Xenologue is far more interesting than the Cindered Shadow story. Hell, I'd go as far as to say I think it has better writing than the base story of Engage. There's at least the thematic through line of not giving up in the face of adversity, inferiority complexes giving rise to horrific actions at the hands of abusive parenting, the cycles of abuse, the bonds that you make being what you make of them. There's something that's central to the overall plot rather than just tacked on. This is what we call foreshadowing your opinion on the base game story. You may recall that I said that we were going to talk about the Corrupted at some point. We're going to do that now. And after we're done, I'm going to go into spoiler territory for the Xenologue, so if that bothers you, you've been warned now, and will be warned again when we get to that point. Okay, so the Corrupted are basically reanimated corpses, basically? That's their gimmick. This is what the majority of the Big Bad's army is made up of. They're zombies, basically, but capable of using weapons. I don't particularly care for this that much, and not because I hate my fellow man and want excuses to slaughter them, kind of the opposite actually. It's because it feels like it undermines the inherent tragedy of war. Because when we defeat the Corrupted, we are not killing anyone. In Free Houses, you're constantly fighting against actual soldiers, a person caught up in propaganda and lies, or with a sense of duty to their nation and everyone and everything in it, with family, loved ones, and a story of their own that we'll never know and will never be completed. Each person we slay is a person that we've sacrificed in a war that maybe could have been avoided, all in the hope of the greater good. In Engage, no, it's a faceless, nameless creature that can be terminated without any thought or consideration. That's it now. If for some reason you want to skip the story beats of the Fell Xenologue DLC, here's a time code. One thing that I think Engage is really good at, when it wants to be, is creating a bleak world. The primary world of Engage is a very colourful and lively one, so when it makes a conscious effort to contrast it, Engage is actually superb at creating a very grim tone. There's actually a fake bad ending into the main story, where if you outright lose in the final battle, you just lose. Everyone has been slaughtered and Aylar is basically a slave, and that is damn interesting. I think if Engage leaned into this aesthetic more, its story could have been one worth remembering, and the Xenologue is a prime example of what I mean. The world of the Fell Xenologue is one where the Divine Dragon and Somron ended up slaying one another, but the Corrupted remained as someone's attempt to continue Somron's plans. Through twists and turns, we meet the counterparts to our allies in this world. Most of them are the diametric opposites of what their prime world counterparts are. But we later learn that all of them are corrupted. Basically everyone in this world is. This entire dimension is effectively dead. Not even the corrupted counterparts of this world seem to know that they're corrupted. This takes one of the weaknesses of the Corrupted, the fact that there's no real inherent loss when the Corrupted are slain, and it's basically an objective moral good to wipe them out in order to protect everyone else on the planet, into an existential nightmare, both for the party who knew these people, or at least their counterparts, seeing how twisted their lives were in this world and also having to be the ones to put them out of their misery, but also for the Corrupted themselves who share the memories of those people, and who all react to the realization that they are corrupted differently, from utter nihilism to outright becoming delusional. Some of them barely even seem impacted by this news, while others don't seem to even fully know what's happened. Certain characters have unique dialogue if they fight against a character that they have a particular bond with in the baseline universe, and that does wonders towards going towards the deconstruction of the idea that they are just mirrors of the baseline world. Alchrist, for example, in the baseline world is, for lack of a better term, a manic depressive. In the Xenologue, he's hyper-aggressive and domineering, but if you attack him with his retainers Lapis and Citrine, his dialogue tells us that they died, and it's heavily implied that their deaths are what made the Xenologue Alchrist this way. It's subtle, and I love it. That's what I wanted from this game throughout the whole baseline game too. That's actually a really good way of turning the Corrupted from this mindless horde into something that creates an emotional impact. If this is the route you're going down, then this is probably the best way that you could go of making this route meaningful. And that adds to the bleak tone of the world of the Xenologue. The one exception to all of this is Fagado, who they just made an absolute lunatic.
I saw him lying there, drenched in his own blood.
I see.
That bright scarlet color. I wonder if your blood looks like that too. Say, here's a thought. How about we find out together? I'll even let you taste it.
This one scares me. Not even the Four Winds were aware of this. Nell knew, and she kept it a secret to try to protect the Four Winds from falling into despair. Speaking of Nell, she has a lot of hostility towards Aylar because it turns out she was in love with the Aylar of this world, so she's been dealing with this disassociation she feels. And then to top all of that off, it turns out that Nil is the one who's continuing all of this. He wants to continue Somron's work as a way to escape what he sees as Nell's shadow. And on top of that, he isn't even Nil. Nil was Nell's twin, and he got slaughtered millennia ago. This guy just took his place. He's actually called Rafal. And this guy is the direct reason that the Four Winds get crushed. Oh, well, the one guy does at least. I'm skimming over a lot of the story here, but to sum it up, during emotional revelations and outcomes, the surviving winds join us in the base reality, and later Nell and Rafal do as well, Rafal having undergone his own redemption arc. It sounds like I have a positive impression of the Fell Xenologue overall, so why did I say both it and Cindered Shadows are bad? That is due to the levels. They are difficult to the point of being unfair. Look, I like a difficult game. I play every game that I get on the highest difficulty available, and Fire Emblem has a reputation for being a difficult series. But there comes a point where difficulty goes from being a struggling but fair challenge and becomes the game has decided to screw you over because balancing is hard. Just throw a million enemies at the player at all times, lower their chance to hit, up the enemy's chance to hit, design levels so that no one is safe, don't even try to be fair, just screw them over. I mean, look at this. In the Cindered Shadows final mission, you have to prevent any of the Ashen Wolves from being knocked out, but they all start the level completely isolated and surrounded by enemies that are going to go straight for them instantly, and also their health is being drained right from the beginning, and the rest of your team, which will include the healers, are on the other side of the map, and it will take them bare minimum 4 turns to get anywhere near enough to help, at which point the Ashen Wolves will already be butchered. Beating this is just down to luck, and this bloody bridge here in Xenologue. I managed Cindered Shadows on the hardest difficulty, but I straight up couldn't on this bridge. It is broken. I lowered the difficulty and recommend everyone does because these levels are difficult in ways that aren't satisfying to figure out, they just fill me with rage. Then you have Chapter 5 and... sweet merciful Odin. In this one, if Alar or Nell fall, you lose. Alar is separated into a different room, while other enemies take potshots at them. Nell is in another isolated room with Rafal, and a corridor leading to a bunch of corrupted soldiers who can enter and overpower you. The rest of your units are in another part of the map and have to go a huge distance of corridors filled with enemies to reach their allies. This is torment personified. I took one look at this, went, oh no, absolutely no way in hell. Found a guide on how to break this level by giving Nell a Tiki emblem on my first try, and I admit that with absolutely no shame whatsoever. If the level is broken, I'm not going to be the one to try to fix it. I'm going to be the one that tears the damned thing to the ground and pisses on the remains of the ruins, and there is no one who is going to stop me. That's my ultimate thesis on the DLCs. I don't mind the challenge, but I would prefer one that's actually fair and doesn't leave me with the urge to kill. Oh, Engage does have another DLC as well, the Divine Prologue. Basically, this one lets you go to an island and fight a bunch of emblems who are stored in bracelets rather than rings. The reason for that is that they're actually from the Xenologue world, and the rules work differently there. How they actually got here is beyond me, to be completely honest, but basically it's a series of fights, and if you win you get to use that emblem, which creates a hilarious situation later. You remember that one level I mentioned where your time crystal is taken away? Well, they also take away your emblem rings, but if you do that, they don't take your emblem bracelets if you got them before. There was this tense all your equipment has been taken, all hope is lost situation. Except you have like 6 emblems anyway, so it's less a fight of desperation and more the exact same fight, but the stakes are higher. We promise. We can't engage, Alar says, while engaged. Okay, I think that's everything, except for the stories of the base game, so let's focus on those for a bit. Okay, Engage. Now we're ringing the alarm bells. If I had to pick one theme to summarize Three Houses' story, that theme would be perspective. In Three Houses, a lot of the academy stage is spent with dealing with strange goings-on. Different groups acting in their own interests, which centre around Garreg Mach, and the hidden history of Fodlan. We learn about the existence of crests, which are said to be blessings from the goddess, which grants special abilities to those that have them, born into their bloodlines. We see how these crests impact Fodlan society, with the nobility using the existence of crests as proof of their right to rule, viewing them as signs of prestige and respect, and holding contempt for any child born without one in their own houses, to the point of disowning any of their children that don't have one. Different characters put different plots into effect, making moves and forming alliances. Things are going down behind the scenes. Eventually, at the end of the academy phase, these conflicting interests all come to a head, and depending on the player's choices you can go down one of 4 routes depending on which house they chose. These are titled Silver Snow, Azure Moon, Verdant Wind, and Crimson Flower. Verdant Wind is the Golden Deer and the Alliance, Azure Moon is the Blue Lions and the Holy Kingdom, Silver Snow is where you side overall with the Church, and Crimson Flower is where you side with the Black Eagles and the Adrestian Empire. The main event that kicks all of this into motion is that Edelgard, who was crowned as the Empress of the Adrestian Empire in secret, or in front of you if you joined the Black Eagles and attended her coronation, launching what seems to be an unprovoked attack on the Church. We've seen moves from a person wearing a mask called the Flame Emperor, who was the reason the bandits were attacking Claude, Dimitri and Edelgard at the start of the game. They approach us after a mission where villagers have been acting crazy and attacking people. They're not responsible, and even offer an alliance with us, but it isn't made. There are members of the monastery who aren't what they seem to be, hiding grotesque appearances and working for groups that we don't understand. We get to see schisms in the Church, the Western Church even launching an open rebellion against the Central Church at Garrick Mark. We learn stories about how one of the leaders had a child who was executed for a role in a conspiracy to assassinate Rhea, and we see Rhea ordering the execution of any of the survivors. When we get to the stage that Edelgard is launching an attack on the Church, we learn that she was the Flame Emperor the entire time. I must admit, I'm not sure what the plan about was to start with the bandits, Edelgard, especially after you nearly got skewered. What was step 1, get brutally murdered, step 2, control Frodlin? I am extremely skeptical of authority in just about any and all circumstances. The interests of those in power and those that they claim to rule are rarely aligned. I don't trust them, and I don't trust Rhea. Gerald didn't trust her, and it seems made it obvious to me that she's hiding something. By this point, I've had multiple conversations with Edelgard, and she's revealed to me her dislike of crests and how they've been utilized and harbored and created a caste system that they impose on the rest of Fodlan's civilization, and her desire to end that structure. That is someone who wants to break down a social structure being used to maintain oppression and power in the hands of a small number of people, or side with the Church that justifies the positions of these nobles via their crests. That isn't a difficult choice for me to make. After I sided with Edelgard, Rhea turned out to be a frickin' dragon, and that these dragons have been controlling Fodlan from the shadows and using the Church to rewrite history and manipulate events to maintain that control. Edelgard's route is where you launch a revolutionary war against those who have manipulated history to maintain power. But if you go down the Golden Deer and Azure Moon routes, you start to learn a bit more about the history of Fodlan and how that came to be. The Silver Snow route being one that explains the most about the origins of the Church and about Byleth's origins. Remember Nemesis from that introduction sequence? He's regarded as a hero throughout Fodlan. In reality, he was manipulated by a group known as those who slither in the dark, survivors of a war before between humans and dragons, in which humanity was nearly wiped out. His actions led to the existence of crests which dictate nobility and standing in Fodlan. He also wiped out Xanadu, a civilization made up of these dragons, leaving Seros, who is actually Rhea, as the only survivor. The situation is far more complex than it first appears, and there are events I haven't even mentioned, such as the tragedy of Duskar, which those that Slither caused, which were used to trick Dimitri into thinking that the Adrestian Empire was responsible, an event which cost him not only his mother's life but caused pogroms of the Duskar people throughout the kingdom. Even Rhea is revealed to have had her reasons for doing what she does, but you will never get all that information on one route or playthrough. No matter what you do, each side is working without all the information. From each side's perspective, they're in the right, but they're all working with different bits and pieces of fragmented information mixed in with lies and manipulation from those that are trying to play them against one another. The Church has been manipulating history for a millennia, and even now Rhea won't just explain what this is all about. Perhaps if they all had that same information, a lot of this could have been avoided, but it can't. There is no one clear right answer. Each side winning this conflict has major pros and major cons. It's all just this muddy, horrible, unclear grey where you have to do the best you can with what information you're given and what routes you're on. And now you have a choice to make. Who do you support? And that is the difference between Three Houses and Engage. Three Houses' story is complicated. Engage's story is a mess. Look, I've been pretty hard on Engage in this analysis. Fairly, I think. I do think that Engage is fun once you get past a lot of the minor issues that do make it feel just less than Three Houses. There's a reason that the title of this analysis isn't Engage is bad, it's Engage struggles. And it does struggle, but if you take anything from this, don't take the point that this is just an unredeemable, unplayable dumpster fire. I do not think that it's bad by any means, and I've tried to be deferential. The number of issues that I've brought up, I think a lot of them are more to do with me than anything. However, the story of Engage is a mess, and that really does boil down to the fact that it treats ALR like a god-given flesh. The premise is that you go on this world tour in order to collect the emblem rings. Along the way, you make a bunch of allies who join in your quest. This setup could be fine, but it has issues. With Free House's setup, you were just selecting a single route, you had interactions with the house leader, and you could speak with other house leaders to boot. You got to learn what they were about, and this is further reinforced if you go along with different houses in subsequent playthroughs. And an understanding of who you were siding with, who you were siding against, and what their motivations were. In Engage, you barely interact with Somron. There's a reason I've barely brought this bugger up. I wouldn't be surprised if I reached the Xenologue and some of you were confused as to who in the world I was even talking about because you'd completely forgotten. Not interacting with him is somewhat justifiable in the sense that he has been sealed away until you reach Elusia, and he only shows up physically after chapter 10, but even after that you barely even interact with him. You only know what his actual plan is in the final fight with him. And look, I'm not one of those people that says that the main character needs to have an emotional connection to the bad guy and that's how all narrative works. I don't think that that's at all necessary. What I do think is necessary is that I know what the hell the bad guy even wants to do. I don't even know the first thing about this Somron bloke. The issue of barely getting the chance to know people is compounded by the fact that in Engage, new party members show up in chapters whereas in Free Houses basically everyone is at Garreg Mach right out of the gate. Made it fairly hard to get invested into the story of some of these people like Linden and Sapphire who showed up on the absolute tail end of the game. There's also this girl who shows up early in the story called Vale, who is looking for their lost sibling, who it turns out is Somron's child, who also has a split personality that is violent and cruel and does Somron's bidding. Ayla goes to new places to get other emblem rings, more allies join. Vale is revealed to have been the cloaked chucklefuck who killed Lumera, but it was her evil side. We go to rescue her and she gets taken and she's basically been suppressed by the bad vibes. And then we learned that at one point that Ayla is Somron's child as well, meaning they're not a divine dragon but a fell dragon. And then everyone decides that they don't care and this doesn't matter. I have questions about this. For one, what is the difference between a divine dragon and a fell dragon? Because this plot twist seems to suggest there basically isn't one, but we have seen Lumera as a dragon and Somron as a dragon, and there are clear physical differences at the very least. One of the differences is that Divine Dragons summon emblems via prayer, but Fell Dragons summon via incantation, and Ayla is described as doing both, but I'm not even sure what the difference is between a prayer and an incantation in this context. I don't think we ever actually saw Lumera do anything different when she was summoning Sigurd than what Ayla did to summon Marth, at least nothing that was conveyed to the player in any way. Second being is that shouldn't this cause a slightly enormous theological issue? Like, Ivy, okay? Ivy is the heir to Elusia, which worships the Fell Dragon. She worships the Divine Dragon in secret, meaning she literally worshipped Ayla, and is now learning that Ayla is a Fell Dragon this entire time. You'd think that this would cause some sort of a crisis of faith. Nope. She just decides she doesn't care that Ayla is actually a Divine Dragon, which further implies that there is no difference between a Fell Dragon and a Divine Dragon, despite the story insisting that there is a difference, so what is even the problem here? This is like being a Christian in the Roman Empire when Christianity was illegal, and then said Christian walks out, runs into Jesus Christ, the object of their religious worship, follows them for a bit, then learns it isn't Jesus actually, it's Judas Iscariot. But then they just decide that no, actually you're Jesus, and just keep on worshipping without question. Alright. The third being, if no one cares and it's not going to impact anything, why the hell did we even have this twist? I'm not kidding when I say that this twist is resolved in the same chapter that it's introduced. You don't even have a battle in between. It's introduced, resolved, and then nothing changes in any way whatsoever in basically the same cutscene. It's just not an issue. You know what could have helped this? Doing the thing that Free Houses did. Wow, I've been saying that a lot, haven't I? Hold off on the A support, and then have some characters react to Ayla being a Fell Dragon. Have Ivy or Pandreo say, you know what, I was shocked at first, and it did make me question a few things about my faith, but then I realized I care about you as a person more than I care about you being the Divine Dragon, so that's that. That would at least convey that this had an impact of some kind. At this point, all I'm asking for are the barest basics of characterization in response to the plot. If we aren't getting that, then what the hell are we even doing here? I feel like I need to specify just to avoid any potential misunderstanding. I am not some kind of sins of the father, you are what you are, people don't change, this is nature brain-dead moron that should have been kicked off a boat in the Atlantic Ocean around the 20th century BCE. The actions any sentient being takes are the only thing that are really worth considering. But I'm not the one with an entire religion dedicated to worshipping one specific kind of dragon as a deity. They are. I would expect them to have some form of reaction to learning that their god is, according to their own doctrine, some kind of demon child that they continue to worship anyway. And if they don't have some kind of reaction, I would like to learn why not. Again, the barest of basics are all I'm asking for here, but let's not get too theological in this game centered around a religious conflict and playing as a religious figurehead. Later on, after more battles and intrigue, we learn that Vale is actually Alar's sibling, and then Alar dies? Gradlon gets lifted out of the ocean, and then Vale basically wills their split personality into non-existence while she is non-existent, and because she can apparently do this, revives Alar as a corrupted. Then Alar dies again, but is then brought back as an emblem?
Fire Emblem.
Oh, piss off. And then we butcher the last two of the four hounds, and one of them betrays Sombron at the last second, which gives us a mega time crystal, with which we then go back in time to meet past Alar and see how they met Lumera before they were adopted and ended up in the coma. Sorry, what the fuck is happening? What is going on? If we were going to have this dumb twist that Alar was a fell dragon the entire time, then why did we just barely even acknowledge it and pretend it didn't happen? Why wasn't that revealed here? Why did we have the same reveal twice? What is the thematic through line? What is this story even about? Because it feels like this story was designed to be the most anime storyline possible, boiling down to essentially teenagers using the power of friendship to kill Satan. Except that's been done before. Better, and without such a bizarre emotional whiplash. That summary isn't fair to anime. Anyway, you beat Sombron, he's toast, and all the emblems just cease to exist. So that's it. You beat a guy you barely know who's apparently Alar's father, not even fully understanding what it is he wants, and why a war was necessary for it, only learning in the final battle that he wants to leave this world completely and then go on an interdimensional conquest to reunite with an emblem that he had as a child or something, even though what little we've seen of him has him mocking the concept of bonds and friendship that would motivate him to go and seek out this emblem, and I don't care anymore. I don't know what makes this guy tick. I don't even know if he's a hypocrite, because that would imply that he's displayed a single moral he's turned his back on. Sombron doesn't represent anything, or stand for anything. If I wanted to seriously lack charitability, I could make the argument that the theme of Engage is showing mercy will bite you in the ass, so when you win a war, leave no survivors. Because that's the plot! Apparently, the enemy Sombron's people were fighting, showed him mercy, and banished him to Helios, and then he decided to go out and attempt to commit an omnidimensional genocide. If they hadn't shown him mercy, a lot more people would still be alive right about now, and this garbage story wouldn't have needed to happen. But I don't think that was the intention. I don't think there was any intention for Sombron other than, well, we need a villain. And that's what makes this story so dull. I don't know. And I don't even care anymore. Engage's story is a mess, especially compared to Three Houses, which had basically 4 stories going on at once, and that you needed to replay 4 times to even begin to fully understand what's going on. Things just happen in Engage, and it really does feel like the beats happen because in theory they would be dramatic, but they have no idea how to build around them because there are no real thematic through lines. Things just happen because they just happen. The only theme I can really see was the idea about found family. Alar's unique hair seems to be a result of the magic of Lumera being used for symbolizing that Alar is more divine dragon than fell dragon through a mother's love, and that supersedes any biological ties they had to Sombron. That's all I've got. I've got nothing, and to be frank, I don't even want to try. To paraphrase popular game reviewer Yahtzee Croshaw, Engage's story is like a glass of milk with a spider in it. It all goes horribly wrong towards the end. Let's just wrap this up, shall we? You might have noticed that this analysis has basically been a bunch of nitpicks. Nearly everything that Engage does I've compared to Three Houses and explained that it's either a worse version of the same mechanic or just removed a mechanic that added more depth to Three Houses that Engage now lacks as a result. And to an extent I do agree. If it had a decent story, I would be willing to overlook everything else. I will permit so much if you just give me a decent narrative to sink my teeth into. I actually plan on doing basically no research for this analysis because I wanted my perspective to be fully blind to any Fire Emblem history so an outsider's perspective could be considered. But while I was double checking some information to make sure I was correct, I accidentally ended up learning that Engage and Three Houses were being made alongside one another, and that Engage had always been intended to be more like a previous entry. So I can't make the exact claim that I would have made had Engage been made in direct response to Three Houses, but it's a point that I feel does need making regardless for any potential future entries into the series. Three Houses is not an easy game to understand. It's easy enough to get into, but once you're in, you have to put in a certain amount of work if you want to follow everything. It's a complicated game, and its narrative in particular is a strength, and it will get complicated very quickly. Three Houses is also popular, and do you want to know one of the several reasons why it is popular? It's because it's a complicated game. It takes effort to get into. It's interesting. Engage is a much easier game to get into and understand, and it's not bad at all, but it's not even close to Three Houses. If anyone takes any one thing away from this analysis, it's this statement. Making something simpler doesn't always mean it's going to be more appealing or reach a broader audience. If a piece of media is complicated, but it's popular in spite of that, then more often than not, to me, that indicates that there is something inside that complicated mess that appealed to people and made them interested in that piece in the first place. I've seen this happen constantly with Fallout, with Assassin's Creed, with Deus Ex. Simplicity can be a good core to build around, a simple narrative can be effective, and simple mechanics can be beneficial, but that doesn't necessarily mean better. There are two myths that exist. One is that simplicity is always better, and the other is that complexity is always better. But neither of these are inherently true. A simple narrative can be bad, or just boring, and complexity can be confusing or incomprehensible. Sometimes it can just be a mess, and sometimes it requires to look at the context, how mechanics relate to the world or the player or the narrative to understand what works and what needs to be removed. But I've rarely seen a piece of media which is complicated and is then simplified and then see people agree that the simpler version is the better one. I've simply never seen that happen before with any piece of popular media. I've seen simple narratives get more complicated in ways that ruin them. I've seen complex narratives get simpler in ways that ruin them. I've seen popular media that is complex get simpler and see people lose interest, but I don't think I've ever seen a piece of popular media get made simpler and that has increased interest. The only real example I can think of that is Fallout 3, but that was more due to it being the first Fallout game released in a decade, and also Fallout 3 is garbage, so I'd hardly call it an improvement, but that's neither here nor there right now. So, we've gone through all of this, an analysis of the mechanics and the stories of both Three Houses and Engage. So let's return to that ultimate question. Why does Three Houses work while Engage struggles? My overall belief is that it's not any one thing that brings Engage down, but rather a lot of small things that detract from the experience, in the same way that a lot of small things made Three Houses good. And the big part of that, I think, can come down to the context of what's happening in the game. The context of a mechanic or story beat can matter just as much as the mechanic itself, and it does feel like Engage doesn't seem to have learned that lesson from Three Houses. You can grind the pacing of the story to a complete and total halt in the middle of what is supposed to be an active war, and it's nowhere near as invigorating as the fact that in Three Houses you have to plan around a calendar that will keep on dragging you ever closer to your next story mission whether you like it or not, because the world isn't going to wait on you. There's no sense of urgency or that there's even much of a threat, or that anything is happening outside of Alar. The context of what you're doing in the story makes what you choose to do mechanically feel so out of place. And story-wise, the reason is because there's no thematic through line, or any real sense of the story is about anything other than the events that are explicitly happening. Like it's just made to connect one string of battles to the next. It's just a bunch of stuff that happens without any real rhyme or reason, or forethought, or basically anything that would make its story special. It's colourful, it's competent, it can be dramatic, it's cheesy and over the top, and not necessarily in a bad way. There is charm to it, and I don't regret the time that I spent playing Engage. I don't think it's a bad game. Maybe I would get more out of it if I were a long-time Fire Emblem fan, or maybe this game just simply wasn't made with someone like me in mind. If this was someone's first entry into the series though, I wouldn't be surprised if it totally lost them. In that sense, I'm glad that it was Three Houses I experienced first, long before Engage. There isn't some catastrophic failure here for me to blast without mercy. There isn't some total breakdown of understanding on what makes Fire Emblem, at least not one that I can see. Just a lot of small things that, speaking as someone who got into this series via Three Houses, just make it feel like so much less than what it could have been. It's just something of a disappointment. What more is there even to say on the subject? Bit of a depressing ending, isn't it? Huh. Would this be a good time to suggest that you subscribe and like and comment? Please? 3 months of my life have been evaporating in front of me while I'm doing this. I require validation. Bye.